Welcome to Day 5 of C++ Builder Bootcamp. Today we're going to talk about stepping up to mobile. Our agenda includes an introduction to the mobile platforms. We're going to look at how to prototype a mobile app on Windows, and then look at some of the things you need to do in order to successfully take that mobile application and deploy it onto mobile. My name is Jim McKeith. I'm the lead worldwide developer, evangelist, and engineer from Barcadero Technologies. And joining me today is David Millington. He's the C++ product manager. So as I said earlier, the objective is we're going to show you everything you need to get the most of your work done on your mobile apps with Starter Edition before you need to upgrade to Professional plus Mobile to deploy to Android and iOS. So we're going to start with a quick introduction to the mobile platforms, talk about some of the differences and some of the characteristics that apply to doing mobile development. First, a little bit of history. Now, you probably all remember when this happened, but it's kind of important to understand for understanding how screens work on mobile devices. So when the original iPhone was released, it was 320 by 480. And then the Retina iPhone was released, and they doubled the pixels per inch. So you can see there's a screenshot there of the two different versions of it. What they did is they didn't increase the amount of text on the screen or put more icons on the screen. Instead, they kept everything the same size and just added more detail. And so what this resulted in is a different logical pixels versus physical pixels. So what that means is, even though the screen was now 640 by 960, you treated it as if it was 320 by 480, but all of the graphics you provided, like for example here, the icon, were at higher resolutions. Okay, so this became 2x graphics, essentially. So the graphics were twice as high resolution in horizontal and vertical. So on Android, there's actually multiples. So the original iPhone would have been the MDPI, which is the one in bold there, roughly. And then the Retina iPhone is the 2X, which is the extra high XHDPI. On Android, there's a variety of different DPI levels, and the multiplier you see there is just roughly what they are. And then there's also a variety of screen sizes. So with Android, there's lots of different permutations going on, but this makes it's really easy to deal with, and I'll explain this all in a little bit. But I just wanted to get you some description of some of these, and then here's some common Android device resolutions. So the Nexus 6, you see, has 1440 by 256 or 2560. But the logical is only 411 by 731. And so that gives it a 3.5 multiplier. So you can take 411 multiplied by 3, and you're going to get to 1440, or pretty close to the 1440. Now, this is based on the pixels per inch and a few other characteristics, but basically pixels per inch. So anyway, you see the common the resolutions there. When you're developing on your applications, you're going to be concerned about the logical resolution, not the physical resolution. Okay. So the logical resolution is what you're going to develop for, and then you're going to use the multi-resolution bitmaps, which I explain in a little bit, will make everything look correct at the physical resolution. So here's some common iOS resolutions. There's much fewer iOS resolutions to pick from, but again, you're going to see there's a physical screen resolution and a logical screen resolution, and then there's a multiplier. The 6 Plus and 6 Plus S use a 3x multiplier. The rest of them are 2x multipliers. So for the longest time, Apple first started out with a 1x multiplier, then they went to 2, and then with the most recent, the 6 Plus and 6S Plus, they went to a 3x multiplier, which is just more pixels per inch. So multi-resolution bitmap, this is what I said, this is the secret to making your applications look good. How this works is it's a single bitmap that can embed multiple resolutions of the same image in that bitmap. And so what happens is you provide the resolutions, a few resolutions, and then it automatically selects the right resolution for the device it's currently running on. So your text, it automatically scales up, and then the bitmaps select the correct resolution bitmap to display on the screen based on the screen density. Now, if you don't provide every permutation in there, it will then interpolate and pick the closest and scale it as necessary. So scaling down is better than scaling up. And a lot of people are like, oh, why don't I just provide the 5x one and it'll just scale it appropriately? I couldn't find a really good example of this, but essentially, if you have, there's sometimes when you scale things down that the details become kind of muddy looking. So for example, let's say you have a graph, or your big icon has text in it. When you shrink it down, that text kind of all runs together and it just looks like junk. And instead, you might, do a little pattern or something like that so that it still has an appealing appearance at the lower resolutions. Now, this is something you experiment with, find what works best for you. Generally speaking, you want to provide the 4x or 5x or whatever high-end one you want to provide. 4x is probably the most common one you'll need to provide high-end, and then just let it scale down. That's a very fine option to do. We'll also point out that the styles that we provide also have the multiple resolutions in them. So they will use the correct resolution for the screen that they're running on. So let's talk about some of the platform and sensor components. Two of these, the motion sensor and orientation sensor, don't usually work on Windows, but the location sensor and sensor manager do work on Windows, as well as notification center for scheduling notifications, camera component to access the camera, media player to record audio and play back audio and video, gesture manager lets you do interactive gestures. That's really actually really kind of cool stuff there. And the style book, which I showed you on Tuesday, I think it was. It's been a long week, to how to set styles. So something else that's cool is the media library actions. This is a way that you can just do single actions that invoke some sort of complex behavior. So for example, you can use a media action to bring out the camera app. So it launches the camera interface, lets the user capture an image, and then sends the image back to your application. You can also use the media actions to access the camera roll, to access a file or a picture from the camera roll. And you can also use the media actions to send text or images through sharing services. So this could be, for example, that image you just took with the camera. You could send that and some text to Twitter, or just you would send it out to the sharing services, and it would pop up, and the user could select Twitter, and it would then send the image and the text to Twitter. We also use the media library actions to do some animated transitions. So you can check out some more information on this in the tutorials. We're not going to get into the media library actions today. There is no concept of these for the camera and camera roll and sharing services on Windows. So it doesn't really make sense to use those in prototyping, but I wanted to make sure you were aware of those. So something that's really cool that really helps in dealing when you're working with multiple devices is the new System IO Utils TPath. So this was introduced a few versions back, System IO Utils, which has utilities in there for working with files, directories, and paths. Now the paths one has a number of common paths in it. So you could say tpath get home path will then give you the path, the home path. Now on Windows, it'll be users, username, app data, roaming is the home path. On OS X, it's users, username. Notice the slash is going in the direction now. On the iOS device, it's private var mobile applications, and then whatever your application ID is, Android data application ID files. So this is the home path where your files go, not where your documents go, but the home files go. So this could be like configurations and such. There's other paths you can get this way. Your temp folder, library folders, photo folders, alarms, ringtones, etc. So if you check out that document, the link you see up there in the upper right-hand corner, that will tell you what the equivalents of these are on all these different platforms, which is really useful. So instead of hard coding in that user's app data roaming path, or whatever the documents folder is, instead of hard coding that is, instead you just say, I want to save it to the documents folder, and it handles it for you. So that way it's in your documents folder, my documents on Windows, and the correct folder on Android and iOS for where documents should belong. So we're going to look at prototyping a mobile app on Windows. We're going to basically follow a mobile tutorial, except we're going to do it on Windows, and then we'll change it over later. So this is what we're going to build. It's a simple photos and effects app, actually combining two tutorials, one tutorial on using the T camera component to take a photo, and the second tutorial is on applying a filter to an image. And so it's kind of a little simple thing. I guess you could add sharing functionality to this, and you could have your own Instagram, for example. Pretty straightforward. So we're going to prototype this, then we're going to upgrade to mobile, and then we're going to show how to deploy it on iOS and Android. So I'll show you my simple photo effects app that I've prototyped here in Windows. It's pretty straightforward. I'll walk you through the code we have here. I'm using a camera component to capture the image from the camera. Now, my laptop has a built-in camera on it, so that it's able to use that camera in order to capture a picture. I have a list box here that contains a list of effects, and you'll notice I have added all those effects here on this image. And so there's two images, image 1 and image 2. Image 2 has the effects applied to it. Image 1 does not. All the effects, this should be disabled to begin with. There we go. All the effects are disabled. And then what happens is when the user selects an effect, it enables that effect on that image. You could enable multiple effects, but they don't always stack very well. So that could be something that you could add to this, is the ability to enable multiple effects if you want to. Go ahead and just tweak this here, make this a little bit taller. There we go. So you can see all the effects at once there in the window, so it doesn't scroll. I'm using a grid panel here. It could have done this other ways. I didn't have to use a grid panel. I was actually originally going to put other functionality here, but I decided I was making it too complicated. So I'm just going to simplify it, because really what this is about is just showing how you prototype this on Windows and then see it running on a mobile device. So let's look at the code here real quick. The camera component has an event on it, on sample buffer ready. And what happens is turn that off there. The buffer comes back in a separate thread. And so you use the thread queue in order to post the getImage handler back to the main thread. Okay? And then getImage just gets the sample buffer that came back to a bitmap and puts it in the image 1 bitmap. And then we take the image 2 and we put the image 1 in there. Actually, I guess I'm going to use make screenshot here. Could do bitmap. Okay, so we're just going to get the bitmap from image 1 and put it in image 2. And then image 2, when the user selects an item in the list box, we turn off all the effects, and then we turn on just the effect they selected. The only other code in here is when the application shows, we activate the camera component, and then when the application closes, we want to get rid of it, turn off the camera component. The better way to do this would be to use the platform services and have it respond to the correct event for that, because there's an event you can get. But I didn't do that. Probably should, but for simplicity's sake, it's here, although I ended up putting the active false in a few places. So that's it. That's all there is to this. Let's go ahead and run this on Windows. So we see here it is. And I can wave, hello. And we'll apply the pencil effect. There we go. The sepia tone. I have two screens, and so I'm looking here at this screen because that's where I see the image at. The camera's over here, so that's why I'm not looking at the screen. Tyler, Ripple. This is just a few of all the effects we have here. Tune, pencil. Okay, so there we go. That's the prototyped app. We've done this on Windows now. So now we're going to talk about some of the things that you can do that will make it easier for your app to behave correctly on the different platforms. First thing we're going to talk about is using platform services, and Dave Millington is going to cover this for you.
FireMonkey is a cross-platform framework, but one problem with different platforms is that they are different. They have different capabilities, different expectations, and even when they have common functionality, they do it in different ways. So how do you address that? With some cross-platform frameworks, we end up with very minimal support. That is, the framework only exposes that common subset of functionality across all the platforms it supports, and as the platforms get bigger, the common subset gets smaller. That's not the FireMonkey way. If iOS does something useful that Windows doesn't, your app should be able to support it. And when it's a common thing, that should be inbuilt. And that's where platform services come in. Platform services are a collection of different sets of platform-specific behavior that one particular platform, like Windows or Android, may or may not support, and if they do support, will do differently. What sort of things? Well, here's a small list. System fonts, message boxes, menus. The main menu is at the top of the screen in macOS, for example. The clipboard, message dialogues, being able to go full screen, showing window Chrome. The mouse position, mouse cursors, multiple displays, text input, keyboards, virtual keyboards, drag and drop, web browsing, gesture recognition, phone dialing, ads, camera, and much, much more. This is only some of the functionality. All of these have interfaces defined, and on different platforms, different implementations of those interfaces are registered with FireMonkey. When any part of FMX, or you in your own code, want to do something in a cross-platform way, you ask if the interface is registered, and if so, you get given something that implements that interface, and you can then call its methods. Sometimes platforms might not have an interface registered, so when your app is on iOS, say, and you ask FMX, is there a mouse cursor interface implementation, you'll get false, nothing, because iOS has no concept of mouse cursors, so no cursor implementation has been written or registered for iOS. But Windows has an implementation registered, since changing the mouse cursor is an essential part of a Windows app. Most of this is hidden. Cursor changes are looked after internally by FMX. Some things you want to access though, such as dialing a phone. The really cool and useful thing here is that as well as being able to query all this functionality and get an object that implements it natively on every platform, you can write your own implementation and register that, even if FMX already has an implementation. If you want to change how the clipboard is implemented on Windows, you can do that by replacing the default FMX clipboard implementation with your own. So let's have a look at two things: getting and using one of these platform services, and writing your own. First, a digression on interfaces. C++ doesn't have the concept of an interface the way other languages do. The closest it has is a class of pure virtual methods, an abstract class. Delphi does have the concept of interfaces, and in fact does them in a unique way. It all comes back to COM. Delphi interfaces are COM compatible, and in fact Delphi treats COM as a first-class language feature. As a side note, if you use COM through something like ATL, you might really like C++ Builder's COM support. We call it DAX or DAX, and it is far easier to use than other libraries that attempt to make C++ and COM mix well. One reason for that is that it can make use of interfaces and classes that look after querying interfaces, reference counting, COM registration, etc. for you. However, that's a digression. The most important thing you need to know right now is that interfaces are a first-class language feature in Delphi, and you can use the __ interface keyword to create one yourself in C++. Interfaces also have GUIDs which are used to uniquely identify them, and that it's common to wrap an interface in a special useful template class called Delphi interface. So IFMX locale service, which is one of the platform services, has a GUID, and to use it from C++ as _di IFMX locale service my variable. With the _di part is the typical way to name a Delphi interface templated type which wraps an interface. And you can see the definition on screen. You can do this yourself if you define your own interfaces. This is just background to explain using reference-counted COM-style interfaces from C++, because FireMonkey's platform services are defined using interfaces. So let's see a simple example of using a platform service by querying the mouse cursor position. You don't normally do it this way. It's exposed in other ways. Mouse move events already contain the cursor position, for example. This is a simple example since it's a simple platform service. In a new multi-device application, I'm just going to go and make that use the new compiler. Drop a button and then write some code to ask if we support the mouse service, and if so, then get the mouse position. So first let's check if it supports the mouse service. Of course, this is Windows, so it will, but let's check. We do that by asking the Platform Services singleton if it supports the interface, and the interface is identified by its GUID. If it does, let's get the interface. Ask it for the mouse position, and show a message box with the coordinates. Let's run that and see what happens when we click the button. And we get the mouse position. By the way, the show message method that we use to show this message box will be using the Platform Services under the hood, because showing dialogues is implemented by a service that's different on every platform. If you want to change how dialogues are shown, you can implement the interface yourself and register your implementation. So let's write our own implementation for something. Let's define the system font. This is the font that's used by default on controls. If you manage this, then the FireMonkey controls, like the button we just saw, will use a different font when we start up the application. Let's create a new unit. In it, we'll include fmx.platforms.hpp, which is where the platform service we're interested in is defined, and system.hpp, which contains a whole host of useful things, but in particular one called tcpp interface object, which lets you create a reference-counted interface queryable COM object, and we're going to use it not for COM, but for the rest of the interface functionality. So let's define a class implementing that interface. You can control-click the interface, or anything, to jump to its definition. Let's do that to copy the methods. Paste those in, get rid of the pure virtual. And switch to the CPP file and implement the methods. So what font is the system font? Let's make it Curio New and a large font size, which is going to be easy to spot. Now we need to register the interface against an instance of this class. You can do this at any time, but at app startup is the best time, and we want this to be in place before any UI elements are shown on screen. So let's go to the project's main source file where the main method is located, and add the header for the class we just created. Then, before the application is initialized or any windows are created, we need to remove the existing implementation of the system font service. And add our own implementation. So let's run. We should see the button and FMX control follow the system font, and the system font is now Curio New. And success. So that's Platform Services. Interfaces and implementations for a huge range of platform-specific behavior and things that may or may not exist on any platform. Lots of functionality uses these under the hood, but you can also use them directly, and you can even define your own if you need.
Occasionally, you're going to have code that you don't want to compile on certain platforms and only compile on other platforms. And for that, you're going to use conditional defines.
A quick note on platform-specific conditional compilation. Despite everything, sometimes you need to write code for one platform and one platform only, or alternative code for different platforms. The best way to do that is with a platform-specific define, so you surround the code you want with an if-def compiler directive. If you haven't come across conditional compilation before, it works like this. Using a compiler directive, which is a statement with a hash mark in front of it, a section of code is marked to be only compiled, to be only seen by the compiler, if something is true. Here, the condition which is true or false is if a particular macro is defined. Macros can be defined by you in code, or in the compiler options, or by the compiler automatically, as with the platform ones. There are a few key macros defined that are useful, one for each platform. They are _plat_ followed by the platform name, so _plat_ macOS or _plat_ Android. You can use these to compile code only for that specific platform. There are also macros defined for each specific compiler, so one for the 32-bit ARM iOS compiler and one for the 64-bit ARM iOS compiler, and the same for each other compiler we have, 7 in total, so you can detect exactly which compiler is being used to compile the code. There are a large number of other macros defined too. If it's an Apple platform in general, if it's any Clang-enhanced compiler, and so forth. There's a list of most of them at the links on screen, which will be in the resources in the blog post for today's session. So what are some guidelines for using platform-specific conditional compilation? First, check if you really need to do it. Not only are FMX and all our frameworks already cross-platform, but they're very capable. Second, check if you really need to do it, again, because many of the frameworks may already have solved the problem. For example, if you want to get the Documents folder for several different operating systems, you don't need to code that yourself. You can use System, IOUtils, tpath. The same class has methods for concatenating file paths, so you don't need to check the platform to see if you want to use a / or \. There's already code that will do the right thing for you. Third, if you do, try to isolate it. Use clean interfaces and hide the fact there are multiple implementations. If you have more than a line or two of code per platform, split the code up so each platform has its own unit. This is how our frameworks are designed. So that was a quick overview of platform conditional compilation. It's easy but often not necessary. There are a wide variety of macros defined in various circumstances, not just platforms, but also compilers, features, or bitness.
And last but not least, a little overview of the way Arc memory management works. Arc is the automatic reference counting. It's a deterministic memory management technique, and it manages your memory and your object references, and it's better than garbage collection. It's really important to remember that because it's deterministic and it frees the memory. You know exactly when it's going to free the memory, whereas garbage collection, you don't know. Whenever it frees it, it frees it.
Arc. So, what is Arc? It stands for Automatic Reference Counting. It's one of several ways to handle the problem of accidentally leaking memory, that is, creating an object and not freeing or deleting it. Here in this method, foo pointer bar equals new foo, bar is never deleted. There are two common ways to deal with this. First, garbage collection. Every so often, part of the runtime called a garbage collector runs through all objects, and for any that do not have a reference, that is, they exist without any variable referring to them, they are deleted. Garbage collectors or GCs are a contentious topic. Some people like them, more I think dislike them. One of the reasons for that is that they are non-deterministic, so the cleanup can happen at any time. Also, the app might pause or have its performance affected while cleanup is occurring. And finally, if cleanup doesn't happen often enough, you can leak vast amounts of memory before it finally occurs. Normal Android development, not ours, which is one of our strong pluses, uses a GC, and it's the source of many complaints. .NET uses one too. The other approach is automatic reference counting. That means that whenever a variable refers to an object, a reference count is incremented for that object. So the object will have, say, a count of 2, which means there are 2 variables somewhere pointing to it. When the count decreases to 0, i.e. the moment nothing is pointing to the object anymore, the object is deleted. The automatic part is that this is implemented in the compiler or runtime, so you, the developer, don't manually keep track. Automatic reference counting, or ARC, is deterministic. The reference counts increment and decrement at known times when the reference is taken or released, so the behavior is known and predictable, unlike a GC. There is no performance overhead imposed by GC cleaning up, just by calling the methods to add and release references, and you won't end up leaking large amounts of memory while waiting for cleanup to occur. The one downside is the possibility of circular references, where A refers to B and B refers to A, so that neither ref count decrements to 0. So how does this affect C++? The answer is it doesn't, not normally. If you watched Patrick Bruneau's talk on Wednesday, you might have learned that C++ Builder can consume Delphi code. That is, you can write code in Delphi and the Delphi compiler emits headers for it, so you can seamlessly use Delphi classes and objects as though they were C++. You can even write classes in C++ that descend from Delphi classes, crossing the language boundary. Delphi uses Arc on mobile, so all Delphi classes use Arc, and the FireMonkey and other frameworks are written in Delphi. In other words, Delphi classes are reference counted, but normal C++ code, yours, is not, and there is no compiler or other interference. So if you're just writing C++, this topic doesn't really affect you. If you're writing C++ that uses our frameworks, it's worth knowing it exists, but it still will not affect you since the behavior change is very small and you're very unlikely to see it. But let's go over what happens. First, normal C++. I have a very simple class here, real CPP class, and a method here, test. So real CPP class pointer leaks equals new real CPP class. Here I'm creating class instance and not deleting it, and it leaks. There is no arc here. The solution is to use a smart pointer, as is normal good C++ practice, like so. Unique pointer, real CPP class, OK, and it's initialized with new real CPP class. Here the instance is deleted when the unique pointer goes out of scope. All this is good normal C++. The interesting bit comes when you access Delphi classes from C++. Let's try this. It's a very similar method, but inside tObjectPointer obj equals new tObject. This does not leak. When obj is created, its ref count is incremented to 1. When it goes out of scope, at the end, the comment 1, it is derefed to 0 and the object is freed. Now here's a more complicated method. What happens here? At 1 and 2, objects are created and their reference count is set to 1. It gets interesting at 3. Here the object created at 2, i.e. B's ref count drops to 0 and B is deleted. The variables B and A now both point to the same object, so that object has a ref count of 2. At 4, B goes out of scope, so the ref count is decremented to 1. At 5, the last reference to the object, A, goes out of scope, so the object is deleted. Despite how it may appear, in normal C++, here with Arc there is no memory leak. It's important to note that this only happens with Delphi classes used by C++ on mobile. It does not happen on Windows, and even on mobile it does not happen for C++ classes, only Delphi ones. In other words, you don't need to worry about it, but be aware for when you access items from a Delphi framework. For example, in a FMX event like a button click, here tButtonPointer button equals dynamic cast tButtonPointer sender, the button variable will be reference counted. There are a few common questions. What if I call delete? The answer is it's okay. Delete on a reference counted class is equivalent to decrementing the ref count. But you should never be using delete anyway. You should be using a smart pointer. Which leads me to the next question. How does this work with smart pointers? The answer is just fine. You should use them just as you do with any other C++ code. How do you know which classes are Delphi ones? Well, any in the FMX or FireDAC or other frameworks. One hint is that their class names are prefixed with T, tButton, tForm, tFireDAC connection, etc. And finally, how does this relate to shared pointer? Well, it's a very similar concept, except instead of an external object, the smart pointer managing the lifetime, it's built into the compiler and runtime. It's also faster and more performant because Delphi classes contain the reference count field in the object itself, whereas Shed Pointer stores it externally and has to deal with the associated storage and other issues. So let's say you really like interesting compiler extensions and language features. What cool things can you tell me? Well, first you can make classes that do this yourself in C++ by inheriting from any Delphi class using declspec Delphi class and then inheriting from a Delphi style class. That gets you access to a lot of other interesting things too. Full RTTI, for example, meta classes. If you're a fan of object-oriented programming and you like Smalltalk, meta classes will be very interesting, and more. There are also some compiler keywords. You can use __weak to store a weak pointer to an object. That is, when the object is destroyed, the pointer will automatically become nil. You can use __unsafe to store a pointer to the object that is not managed in any way. It does not affect the reference count and is not nulled. If you use __closure to store an object method pointer, as in the code sample on the screen, which stores an object method pair and then calls that method, the object instance inside the closure is a weak pointer. In other words, it becomes null when the object is destroyed. All of which is rather cool stuff. How does this affect your code? Well, it doesn't really. Use smart pointers just like in the rest of your C++ code. In other words, don't change your coding style. Just know that Delphi classes T something will be alive until the last reference to them vanishes.
So now let's talk about how we're going to deploy this app to mobile devices. So one thing that's new that you need to understand about mobile device deployment is the deployment manager. This is in the project menu under options, and the deployment manager allows you to manage the files that get put into your app bundle. And so you can go in here and select different files, for example, launcher icons, or if you're bundling some documents or you're bundling in database files, etc. That's all done through the deployment manager. When you're deploying to Android, you also need to be aware of permissions. Permissions allow you to specify what your app's going to do. Now, these permissions show up in the App Store, but even when you're deploying it through debugging purposes, which doesn't give you the accept permissions screen, you still need to flag to the OS what your app's going to do. So common permissions include location. There's both fine and coarse location, camera, internet, Bluetooth, etc. So take a look at the uses permission screen and make sure that the locations you need are checked. Now, if you use it and it doesn't work, you get an error message or you just doesn't behave, you might be missing a permission. So it's important that you set everything up correctly for mobile development. The PA server is a utility that you run on your Macintosh computer that your IDE talks to, and it sends the file across to be deployed onto the Mac or onto the iOS device. You can do it on a local network or remote network, and there's actually some people that have used the Mac and Cloud service, which is a cloud-based Mac hosting service, and you can connect to that remote machine. It might take a while because you're sending it across the internet, but you can do it without requiring you to go out and buy a computer, a Macintosh. You can pick up a simple Mac Mini, pretty cheap, and hook it up to your TV and be good to go, get a used one. Or you can go with a MacBook Pro and run your IDE in a Windows virtual machine and then have PA server running on the host machine. Number of different configurations, but you need to have PA server set up. For Android development, you can do all this through Windows, but you need to have an Android USB driver. Now, most of the devices will have a different USB driver, so you have to install the driver. That's just the requirement for it. There's usually documentation either from Google or from the manufacturer of the device, and there's some other third parties out there that provide some attempts at universal drivers. So once you have that driver installed, then it will show up the ADB composite bridge or something like that in Device Manager, and that way you know it's there. There's other documentation out there, but I'll point you to these videos that have some getting started. It shows you how to walk through all the steps of setting up PA server, setting up Android drivers, etc., so that you're ready to go with mobile development. I'm not going to repeat all that information here because it's all out there in those videos for you. You can check those out and you'll be good to go and ready to go right away. So now what we're going to do is we're going to load our prototyped app into Professional, and we're going to deploy to iOS and deploy to Android. We'll also talk about debugging on mobile. Now I'm going to make a disclaimer. I was working on this and discovered that my iOS provisioning or iOS developer program membership expired, and I wasn't able to go through the steps of getting it renewed. So I'm not going to actually show iOS. Unfortunately, I thought it was going to work, and I went to do it, and it was like, why isn't this working? Why isn't this working? And I finally logged into the developer portal for Apple, and it says, your developer profile is expired. I'm like, what? So that's one downside with Apple is you do have to join their developer program, and you have to set up provisioning with that. That is explained in the documentation. And hopefully you keep better track of it than I did and don't have your profile expire. This is the photo effect app loaded up and running now in the Enterprise edition of Rad Studio. We'll go ahead and run it here, and you can see it's working exactly the same. This could be mobile with Professional add-on. Hello. And now there's a bunch of me. Or in this case, it happens to be Enterprise Rad Studio. Both will work just fine. A couple things real quick is we can use the style preview to see what it would look like on iOS, Android, OS X. And we can also come in here and we can create variant views. So for example, let's say we want to tweak the appearance just slightly on the iPhone 5.5 inch, which is the 6 Plus. And we can just select this. It'll create a new view that we can then make slight modifications to it. So what it does is it just does the differences there. This is a really cool functionality part of Fire UI. I'm not going to go into it right now. There's lots of other videos out there that cover that. So now we're going to go here and we're going to add another platform. So if I expand target platforms, Win32 is the only one there. Let's say add platform, and I'm going to select Android. Now I have to come in here, project options, and uses permission is the first place we're going to go. Where's the uses permission? Right here. So we need to go in here, we select all Android platforms, and we want to turn on camera. By default, when you create a new project in the mobile edition, it'll have these camera and location, those other ones enabled. But because this project was created in Starter, those aren't always set. The other place we need to come in here and change is under here under Application. We have to provide icons, launcher icons, etc. Now, what I've done is I've created a previous one that I used before that has all my icons in it. So what you can do is you create a new project, and then that's going to have the default ones, and you hit save, and you can save off the option set. Okay, and then you come and create back into here, and you hit apply, and you can load that option set back in. That's all I've done. So one thing is, if you do run any kind of problems, just create a new project in the Professional edition and compare your project file, and usually you can figure out what's going on. If nothing else, create the new project and just copy your code, your form file, into the new project, removing the form and code that's already in there. Okay, so now we've selected Android as our default platform, and it's discovered my Nexus 5, which is connected to the computer here through the USB cable. I've loaded the USB drivers for it. And so now we can go ahead and deploy this to my Nexus 5 and run it from there. Okay, so here it is running on my Nexus 5. For some reason, it's narrow. Apparently I need a little formatting on there, but we can see I can apply the effect now. So let's apply the tiler onto it. So apparently I probably need to change the way the camera's set up. Oh, that's what it is. I'm holding the camera vertical, and it's taking a vertical photo. So it's taking a portrait photo and putting it in a landscape spot. That makes sense now that I think about it. So let's say sepia. There's sepia. We'll do pencil. So there we go. So yeah, I could work around that now that I realize what's going on there. So there we go. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Clearly, I could do a lot more to make it behave better. If I were to use the tab control or something like that, they would have had the platform default behavior. Those tabs would have changed positions. If it were on iOS, if I had my developer program still in effect. But there we go. There it is running on Android. And this could then run again on iOS as well, or OS X as well. And now it's time for Q&A. I'm going to point out these 3 links here. You can join us at community@embarcadero.com if you have more questions. You can also follow us on Twitter at Embarcadero Tech, and we're on Facebook with a number of different pages, but the C++ Builder one is a good place to start. There's our email addresses, and now we'll do some Q&A.
So, hi everyone, David here. There's a question as well about using the bitmaps on mobile. It's to do with the difference between the pixels on screen versus the real-life dimensions, and pointing out that problem doesn't exist with vector graphics. And that's completely true. So FireMonkey is actually a vector-based UE framework, so it actually scales really nicely. But sometimes you do need to use bitmaps. You might have an icon perhaps, or a photo, or other images, or you might want to use a theme that is image-based or something like that. And
well, most of the styles do use raster graphics. So, but it's weird because some of it's vector, some of it's raster, but most of FireMonkey is raster graphics anymore. In order to get the more consistent styles, it's migrated from vector to raster since it was first introduced.
Yeah, that's true. Thanks, Jim. But that's where the multi-resolution bitmaps come in. So it will choose the appropriate one for the scaling. And the idea is to always have a high-quality image, no matter the DPI or the scaling.
Now, FireMonkey does support. You can load in path information, and then you can draw raster or vector graphics with FireMonkey. So that's an option. That if you were here on Tuesday, the sample I showed that showed the path animation, I had loaded a path information in to draw a path, and then I animated that path as well. And so if you go look at that sample there, you can see how I loaded that in there to draw that path. Essentially, I took some SVG, and I went into the SVG file and pulled the path information out of it and put that into the path information for the FireMonkey application or FireMonkey component, and that drew the path there. So it's compatible, same path information.
So a few more questions. There was a good question about seeing two file extensions, .h and .hpp, and to ask us what the question there is. Both those are header files, so C++ uses both the header and the implementation in a CPP file. There's no sort of real standard for which extension to use for a header in the wider C++ community. There's .h and .hpp, and sometimes even a few other extensions like .hxx I've seen a couple of times. For us, we use .hpp for the auto-generated header files, and then we use .h for the header that you use with your own code.
I always wondered what the difference was too, so that's good to know.
Well, that's just our standard. I think everyone does something different. So, but yes, that's how it is in C++ Builder. This question is whether FMX is open source or if it's proprietary only for us. And yes, it is proprietary only to us. It's a library that we make. When you buy the Pro Edition, it actually comes with the source. It's definitely not open source, but it lets you see what the source code is. You can dig in and see how it functions and that kind of thing if you want to.
Yeah, it's kind of more of, I think the term I've heard is called shared source, the idea being that we're not giving you a free license to do whatever you want to with the source code, but as long as you own a license to the product, you can view the source and change the source and use it within your project as much as you want. But you can't take that source code and then give it to somebody else in source code format so that they can do something with it. So, yeah. There's a question here about using PNGs in FireMonkey. And actually, most of your user interface graphics should be PNGs. So JPEGs are when you'd use for if you want to put like a photo into the application. Like, for example, in the sample I made there, that if I was to write that out, that would be as a JPEG, or if I was going to put that image, embed that in there for like a background, if I wanted like some cool-looking nature scene, that would be a JPEG. Otherwise, everything else should be PNGs. And the difference is that PNGs are don't have the compression artifacts in them. They're a lossless compression, and so they'll look much better in your user interface than a JPEG would. Is the VCL library being phased out? No, it's not. In Berlin, I think even, we just had some new, it was either Berlin or Seattle, I can't remember, probably both actually. We had some new VCL components introduced, some new features around VCL. VCL, as long as there's Windows, there will be VCL. It's a really nice, lightweight framework for working around Windows, building Windows applications, and there's lots of advantages to it. I've gotten to the point now I kind of prefer FireMonkey better, but there are some times, and there's some applications that I'm like, oh, this really needs to be a VCL application, just because I know it needs to use a specific control that is only in VCL, or that maybe I like the behavior better in VCL, or if I want it to be really lightweight, VCL applications are a little lighter weight than FireMonkey applications. And then FireMonkey applications, if it's going to be cross-platform, or if you want to take advantage of some of the more flexibility in the user interface, then that's when you choose a FireMonkey. But yeah, VCL's going to be around for as long as there's Windows. There'll be VCL. Question here: if the project is downloadable? Yeah, I'll have the project. I'll put it up on the URL there, the 2016 CPP Bootcamp 5 URL. There's not much there now, but I'll have this project up later today where you can download it and take a look at it. It's really quite simple, the code for it, and I had this great idea. I was going to have all these great features in it. I was like, you know what? I want something simple, and it may have ended up being too simple when I was done, but hopefully it showed just the simplicity of building the user interface and then having it be able to run that same app on Android. There's a lot more, and I'll have some links on that page as well, showing you some UI considerations, more UI considerations you can do in order to have an app that looks more like an Android app, more like an iOS app when you're done. Serena DuPont has put together some great training materials around that, so you can take a look at those and get a better understanding of how to address those platforms better.
So there's a question here about using normal pointers versus smart pointers and ownership. So I'll just read out the question. I use normal pointers to save them in a vector of my type pointer and use them until the program ends and then delete them myself via deleting all the vector items. Is this not good programming? I don't want the pointers to be freed by going out of scope. So this is sort of an architectural question, but it's a very common pattern, and it is, I think, in modern C++, not really the way to do it. The reason for that is that it's more dangerous. I mean, it's very easy to leak memory. You have to remember to correctly free everything yourself, and it's much better to use a programming style where you know confidently that the right thing is going to happen. So that's the reason why you should normally give all pointers to a smart pointer object, which will look after the lifetime for you. And the question then is, what is the lifetime of the smart pointer object? And it's not always scope. I mean, the pointers would not be freed by going out of scope, depending on where you store them. So, for example, if you have something that is supposed to be for the lifetime of the entire application, then you would want to store those somewhere that exists for the lifetime of the entire application. You might have a class that manages your data. You create one of those, and it looks after all your pointers, because it would use smart pointer objects to store those when it is deleted and all its fields are also destructed. Those pointers would all automatically be deleted. So there might be a slight clarification here about pointers being freed by going out of scope. The smart pointer doesn't necessarily free an object when it goes out of scope exactly. A smart pointer frees when the smart pointer object itself is destructed. So for a method, when a smart pointer is declared just inside a method, then like any variable, it will be destructed when the method ends or when that particular block hits an end. But the lifetime can also be controlled by, it could be a field of an object or something like that. So perhaps the short way to answer that is yes, please do try to use smart pointers. It's much more reliable, and it also really helps you keep track of what is responsible for looking after the lifetime of an object. You don't use somewhere and then delete somewhere else. It's all sort of localized, and you can easily tell what part of your code is responsible for what.
And the great thing about smart pointers is which is a deterministic memory management, which means that you can look at the code and you can know when the object is going to get freed. And as opposed to garbage collection, where it pools up the objects and then at some point pauses it and frees all that memory and frees the objects. So smart pointers, automatic reverse counting, is a much superior way of managing your memory over garbage collection. At least with today's hardware, especially on mobile. It's huge on mobile.
Yes, so just to clarify there, that would be shared pointer that Jim was talking about, which keeps a reference count. There are a couple of different types of smart pointer, but they all sort of achieve the same thing in different ways for different purposes. Shared pointer keeps a reference count, and it's very useful that way.
So how does smart pointer work then? I guess you know more about C++ than I do. Well, how does smart pointer know when to free the memory?
Okay, well, there are two sort of types of smart pointer in C++ 11. There's unique pointer and shared pointer.
Right.
So basically, unique pointer just takes ownership. I give it a pointer, and it says, okay, when in my destructor, I'm going to delete that pointer. And that's basically as complicated as it gets. It can transfer ownership as well. So, for example, if you store one in like in a standard container, for example, that's fine. You can just pass the pointers around. There's only like one pointer is only ever owned by a single unique pointer object at a time. So the ownership will just be transferred and then eventually will be deleted. Shared pointer is the interesting one. That keeps a ref count. Now, with Arc, it's really nice because the ref count is actually part of the object itself. The class layout includes a ref count field. But of course, for C++, you can't do that because you define, like normal C++, you define every field in your object. So shared pointer keeps an external ref count list, and that makes it slightly slower because there are issues to do with how you store that and that kind of thing. What it means is that you can have several several shared pointer objects all pointing to the same pointer, and it will know that there are 3 of them or 5 of them or 10 of them. And so only when the very last shared pointer object is destructed will the pointer be deleted.
Okay, that makes sense.
I put a link, this is David I put a link in the chat window to a really good PDF file on smart pointers for C++ from the University of Michigan. It covers weak pointer, unique pointer, and so on. So I encourage everyone to click on the link in the chat window, and maybe, David, you can include the link in your Wednesday blog post. It's a really good overview with samples and explanations out of the University of Michigan. It's in PDF form. It's really good.
Well, thanks for that, David. Smart pointers are very worth using, so they're a bit difficult to explain sort of just by speaking without sort of slides or code in front of us, but I would encourage everyone who's listening to please look at the PDF that David posted and investigate using them in your code.
And also just check out, look in the header file subdirectory in the install and look at the memory header file, and that will show you the declaration of all the different smart pointers that are available in C++11.
I do want to address one thing. Yesterday we had the game development with Eli, and it was really cool. Actually, I learned a lot. Game development was one of those things I've really had a hard time wrapping my head around, but I really feel a lot more comfortable with game development after that session. He explained things and showed simplifying, like the game loop and then how it worked and the whole millisecond. Anyway, that was really cool. But one thing that happened was we found out that the games wouldn't build in Starter Edition. So Eli last night went and modified the game so that now they'll build in Starter Edition. So if you go to the link for the games and go to the GitHub, you'll see there's 3 folders in the GitHub. the classic folder, which is the pre-C++ 11, modern, which is C++ 11 features, and then starter, which is the C++ 11 features, but modified to work in starter edition. And I tested all of those in starter edition. They all worked, and had a couple other people also tested them and made sure that it worked. So if you're on starter and you want to do some game development, you can go check that out and grab that. And if you build based on those projects there, then that's a great way you can plan for stepping up to mobile. If you were to go in and change the graphics or however you want to do with those and create your own version of those games, as soon as you're ready and upgrade to professional with mobile add-on, you could have a game that will run across Windows, iOS, Android, and OS 10, and you'll be ready to go. So check those out, and you can start working on them with Starter today.
There was a question there about Eli and the 36 millisecond timer loop. Eli did explain that, and it was related to the human cognition of change of animation and changes frame rates with the human eye and brain.
Yeah, exactly. He said that the human eye can see roughly 27 frames per second, and so, or 25 frames per second, so 36 milliseconds gives you 27 frames per second. So I think he said that there was, some experimentation to find the optimal spot in there so that any more frames per second, and human's not able to see it, but any less, and you start being able to differentiate the frames. So the idea is that you want to have as long a loop as possible, just so you don't, because he talked about, if you take longer than 36 milliseconds to complete each pass, then you'll lose frames. So you have to find that optimal spot there where that works. So I thought it was really interesting because I had that same question, like, why 36 milliseconds? That seems arbitrary, but it's one of those tried and true numbers. That's one thing that I do know about game development is there's enough, over the years, there's been enough experimentation that they've discovered some things for how to do some shortcuts and what the best way to do things are. And so that's why it was great to have Eli, share this, because Eli's done a lot of game development over the years, and to share some of the things he's learned in game development. So like that 36 milliseconds, apparently that's the magic number. Any thoughts on developing a C++ builder course on a site like Udacity? Actually, we've been talking about a few things, both the C++ and a Delphi course. I'm not sure where it's going to end up at, but there's been some talk about stuff like that. I don't know that I know any details beyond the fact that it's something we're working on putting together, but stay tuned. Community.marketera.com. We'll hopefully have some details up there soon about that.
There's one other question here, which is more of a statement. Any use of pointers can be dangerous. Enough is to just sort of go outside the range of memory behind the object. That's quite true. And I think one of the big things about modern C++ is that it's trying to not sort of hide the use of pointers, because you still have to allocate dynamically, but to manage that so you don't actually directly ever use pointers. You refer to objects, or you use sort of higher level data structures like lists or vectors instead of arrays and that kind of thing. And it means that you end up with sort of clean code and safe code, and code that you can prove easily without having to investigate it, but you can be very certain that it's doing the right thing. And it's really nice to have that kind of level of confidence in your confidence in your code.
Yeah, what is it? It's their untyped pointers, right? That where you are just pointing it to an arbitrary place in memory. That's where it really gets really dangerous. But it's the typed pointers where you're like, oh, I'm pointing to an instance of this object, and you're not doing any pointer arithmetic on that pointer. It's much safer. Is that accurate? Am I saying that right?
It is safer there, but you still then have to look after the lifetime. I mean, you ask questions like, what owns this object, and when should I delete it, and how do I know what's responsible for looking after this? And those are the sort of questions that you shouldn't have to ask. That sort of should be something that is looked after, and that's where the smart pointers and other kind of resource management systems like that come in.
So there's a question here about physics engines, and there's Newton Dynamics is one. Bullet is another one, and then actually there is a different version, I found out, a different implementation of Box2D. Eli's put this one together from FXpress. Box2D is actually a pretty powerful engine. So there's not, but this if you're not using this version, you might try this version. I've heard people reports that it works better. I've not done very much with Box2D, but this might possibly be might work better for you than the one you're currently using if you're not using this one. Which database do you prefer for development? Because we have one code and more platforms. So, what data? I could tell you about different databases. SQLite is like the lowest level, simplest database. And it'll work across all platforms. Then Interbase would be the next one up from that. And Interbase actually it's really cool because it's still lightweight embeddable like SQLite is, but it has a lot more features and it's much more robust. And you can go with Interbase to Go, which is compatible with SQLite or Interbase Lite, IB Lite, and gives you all the cool features like table encryption, column encryption, etc., which is really cool features. Like many times, I've wished I had that in the past. Then once you get beyond there, you can look at other local databases like Sybase. Those are going to work on only Windows platforms typically, and then you can look at remote databases like Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server or MySQL, and those you would connect to on another machine. I guess MySQL you could connect to locally as well, I believe. So it really depends on what you're trying to accomplish. Some things you can just do with a flat file and load them up into a memory table. If you're not familiar with FireDAC, if you've been using like BDE for years and haven't upgraded to FireDAC, wow, FireDAC is light years ahead of what the BDE was. It's really an amazing framework. It has the ability to do in-memory data sets and do in-memory SQL against these data sets. There's actually, this is really cool, you can do a in-memory SQL statement across multiple data sets, so you can do a join. So I actually did a demo. I was like, well, I wonder how crazy you can get with this. And I had, I want to say, 7 different data sets from 7 different sources. So I loaded in from a CSV file, I loaded it from a REST service, I loaded it from an Interbase database, I loaded it from a Access database, I loaded it from an Oracle database. Anyway, like I said, I got 7 different ones, and then I did a join using in-memory SQL in FireDAC across all these data sets, all from the different sources. They were all different types of data sets, and it just worked. It was beautiful, and I can't tell you how many times in the past I've pulled my hair out wishing I could do something like that, and FireDAC just makes it so easy to do. So if you haven't used FireDAC, use FireDAC, and then the database you're using is kind of irrelevant at that point. I mean, it makes a difference, but really any database you can connect to with FireDAC is going to be 10 times better than connecting to it with BDE or some other database.
If I'm going to put my Stephen Ball, he's the Interbase product manager hat on. And if you have
Yes.
Pro, Enterprise, Architect, and/or the trial, we give you a developer license for Interbase SQL Server and Interbase SQL, and it comes in several editions. I put the link in the Q&A log. It comes with Interbase Server, Interbase Desktop. It comes with Interbase to Go, which is Interbase in a DLL or DILib, or as a static library that can be linked into your iOS and Android apps. We also have IB Lite. IB Lite is doesn't have encryption. It's limited to a 100 megabyte file, but it's a full ANSI SQL 92 version of Interbase that comes as a static library again and can be linked into your executable, so you don't have to put it on some machine somewhere, and it runs on Windows, OS, Mac OS, iOS, and Android. So I put that link to the Interbase editions, and you can check out the feature sets of those. Again, if you have Pro, Enterprise, Architect, or Trial, we give you test licenses and test deployment licenses. And IB Lite, we give you a free unlimited deployment. So think SQLite, think IB Lite. The difference being, again, IB Lite or Interbase Lite is full ANSI SQL 92 capabilities, so you're not limited in any way. There was a question about when FireDAC came in. It came in. It wasn't in EXE 2. I think FireDAC came in what, in EXE 4 or exe5.
I think that sounds right.
exe4.
Well, I think exe5 shipped with, but exe4 was a separate download, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, we acquired it from DA Soft. Dimitri is the developer over in Russia. Is the creator and architect. So I'm going to put the link to the FireDAC landing page in the Q&A log. So you'll be there. Yeah. Yeah,
FireDAC is really cool. And actually, I'll echo what Dave was saying about interfaces. That really that would be your first place to start, because it occupies a really nice space in the middle there of having the ability to be lightweight like SQLite, or a more robust database like MySQL or even Oracle or Microsoft SQL Server. And you can really decide where in that space you want to occupy because of its flexibility. There's a question here about if you have a server side running on Windows PC and the client running on Androids, what database would you recommend? One that does not need a license for each location. So you could, the thing that gets tricky at that point, and I say tricky because it's maybe not immediately obvious, is that if the database is on another machine, then you need some sort of remoting technology like DataSnap at that point to connect to that. So you could do that. You could use Interbase on the back end, and then you could even use Interbase Lite because it doesn't have a licensing on it, and then you could use DataSnap to connect to it, to connect to that database. So that would be one option. You could build your own remoting framework, although, again, it's one of those things, typically you're going to find that you're better off using the pre-built remoting framework because it's already done, it's already tested, it already works, and then you can spend your time actually implementing your application instead of trying to reinvent the wheel, as it were. Reinvent the wheel, as it were. So yeah, SQLite, IBLite, and MySQL would, I guess Postgres as well. That'd be the databases I can think of that don't have licensing restrictions on them that you can use without, freely. And then, but any of those work. Like I said, I'd probably start with Interbase, IBLite, and then go from there. Is it easy to delete my vector bracket, my pointer star in the destructor of the class containing the vector? Or it's easy to do that, but I can imagine when my program crashes, smart pointers will have freed, and my method of deleting pointers in the class destructor doesn't work when the program crashes. Do you see that question?
I do. It sounds like that's mixing using raw pointers and smart pointers. So if you have a vector of pointers, then the way you're describing is that in the destructor of your class, you would iterate through that vector and you would call delete on each element to delete each pointer. What would be better there would be to have a vector of smart pointers. And so when your class destructs, the vector field will of course be destructed, and all the smart pointers that it holds will also be destructed, and they will delete the pointers for you. So you don't have to iterate through, and you don't have to manually call delete at all. So the second half of the question about when the program crashes, from the description there, that sounds like it's mixing smart pointers and raw pointers, and I would advise not to do that. It's better to use only smart pointers and then pass around references or something like that if you can. But the other thing about smart pointers is that they're very useful for exceptions. So with exception handling, you'll sort of unwind the stack and that kind of thing, or destroy objects automatically. And so often you'll find that the resource management of using something like a smart pointer will ensure that something is deleted correctly when an exception, like a crash of some sort, occurs. So the short answer there is to not delete manually, but to always use smart pointers where possible.
And some people I've talked to seem to be hesitant to use smart pointers, whether it be in whatever format they are. And really, I think my experience is that once you really understand, like that link David provided there, the PDF about the way the smart pointers work. Once you really understand the pointers and realize it's not black magic, you can look at it, you can know when the object's going to be freed, what's going on, then it's much easier to take advantage of it. So if you feel like you're hesitant about using smart pointers or wanting to manage things manually, definitely check out that PDF so that you could get a better understanding of the way it works and that understand that it is, you're still in control. It's still deterministic, but it is one less thing you have to remember to do manually, and that's a good thing.
There have been a lot of questions over this week about smart pointers as well, and I think it might make good material for a future webinar.
Yes, or in blog posts, which we're going to get your blog on the menu in the community site, and you can blog about smart pointers. Charlotte.
Until then, keep an eye on blogs.margatearea.com because there are a lot of people who post there. Jim and David, David I, both post there as well, and many other people as well. So keep an eye on the entire blog feed. All the replays are going to be up on the blog feed as well.
There was a question about database tutorials, mobile tutorials. If you go to the mobile tutorials page, there's mobile tutorials for using Interbase to Go with FireDAC, using FireDAC and SQLite on iOS and Android, using FireDAC in mobile applications in general. So there's specific mobile data tutorials, but all of those tutorials, even though they might mention mobile, could be used if you're building Windows desktop apps or Mac OS desktop apps. It's still FireDAC after all. So you can take a look at some of those. I put one of them, a couple of the links in the chat window, so you can go and look at those. I think, let's see if I'll put another one in there. I don't know if that's the same one. But yeah, in the mobile tutorials, if you go to the home page or download the ebook, we gave you the link to that PDF. Scroll down there towards the bottom of the mobile tutorials page. There's a whole set on FireDAC. Also, if you go to the C++ Developers Guide, I gave you the link to that on the Doc Wiki. There's a whole section on database programming with C++ Builder. Again, for professional enterprise architect, and you can use the trial edition as well. If you have the professional edition, you could do local database access for SQLite, local Microsoft SQL Server, as long as it's on the same IP address as your executables running on Interbase desktop, for example, running on the same machine. If you want to do remote SQL database access, talking to some other server, then you can either get the FireDAC client server add-on pack for professional, or you can upgrade to the enterprise, and you can compare the pricing on the shop site of the two different options.
So there's a question here about communication over a serial port, RS-232. And I believe, don't we have a component in Get It that does that, don't we?
I think we do, yes. And if we don't, I know there are some excellent third-party free components to handle that. But I think you're right. I think it is in Get It.
So I'm booting up my starter VM right now. Yeah, Async Pro. Yeah, Async Pro will do that, which I think is in Get It. If not, you can find it. It's part of the TurboPack, which is a collection of components, of open source components that are being maintained to move forward and work with the latest versions. So that's a great thing so you can know that they'll work with the Berlin. Yes, it's in TurboPack. So there's a question here about Pro version to connect to databases. So the Starter Edition does not have databases in it, and you do need the Pro version or Enterprise Edition to connect to databases. That's one of the differentiators between the different tiers is database support. So yeah, you'll need to upgrade to Pro if you want to get databases. If you want to get the multi-tier support is what's in Enterprise. The REST components, which are amazing, I'm a huge fan of those, are in Pro as well. I'm trying to think of some other things that are differentiated. There's a feature matrix that you can take a look at. Oh, I can share my screen. So let's go to C++ Builder. My video is rendering in the background, so everything's going to be really slow. And feature matrix. So this is the place you can go to find out what is available in each different edition.
Yes, there's a question about converting between different languages. So to convert from one language to another, perhaps using the Google Translate API. So as far as I know, the Google Translate API is available as a REST service, I think. And so we have some really good REST components in Pro. You would just sort of throw those together, query Google, send it the text, and you would get back the translated result.
Yeah, the Bing has their API available that does that as well. I think there's a couple other ones out there that do translation. So, and I've seen examples. I think we did a skill sprint around that. If you take a look at our skill sprints list, you can find those and see that particular examples.
There's a question here about keeping C++ Builder up to date, like Delphi. So I can answer that. I'm the C++ Builder PM, and yes, absolutely. So we're actively focusing on both. So most of the team actually works on both products. It's a sort of very shared kind of thing. But yeah, no, C++ Builder has a lot of work being done on it right now. We have some very exciting things coming up. We released a roadmap actually a few days ago, which you'd have a look at. There's some very nice things coming up in some updates and the next releases that are scheduled. So check out the roadmap as well. It has some good information for you.
See, now with C++ having all those great new C++ 11 features in there, I'm starting to wonder when we're going to get those in Delphi.
Well, actually, I think Delphi led with some of those features as well. I mean, things like anonymous methods that we later sort of exposed as lambdas, for example. I'm not sure of the timeline, but pretty certain Delphi got those before the C++ standard was actually finalized.
Yeah, that's probably true. But there are some things, lambdas are a little bit different than anonymous methods. So, I don't know. Yeah, you're right, though. Let's see. Actually, the few questions came during the week about Android services, because right now Android services is going to be done in Delphi. And if you check out the roadmap, which if you go to community.marketera.com, you can find it, it shows that Android services are scheduled to be in the next major release, which I believe they're calling Godzilla, which comes out later this year, is going to have Android services with C++. And so that will bring that feature to parity. And the plan is that they're really going to work hard to keep those features in parity. When the feature comes out on Delphi, it'll also be available in C++ Builder. What happens is sometimes it gets implemented on one and it turns out to be more complicated than the other, and so instead of delaying it altogether, they release it on one platform and not the other, and then we just try and play catch up. But they're really wanting to work really hard to keep those in parity now. Been in lots of meetings talking about that. If you go to the GitHub now, there's 3 folders on it. One's called Classic, one's called Modern, and one's called Starter. The Classic one is the pre-C++ 11 code. Modern is the C++ 11 code. And then Starter is the modern, but without the app tethering and database features in it. So it's going to be really slow because I got this video rendering in the background, but I'll go ahead and hit build on this. No errors, you see here. And here's Alien Invasion. And I can play it now. So this will all build now with the Starter Edition. So just go out there and grab the latest version. I want to grab the folder that's called Starter, and I get to 5,000 points.
So there's a question here about some SDKs that are made available for, say, C# or Visual C++ or something, but the companies who make those SDKs don't actually produce a specific C++ builder version like Steam. And yeah, that's a good point, although many of them should be usable anyway. But if there are particular SDKs like that, I'd be very interested in hearing what you like the ones that you would actually find useful. So yeah, you can drop me an email at david.millington@embarcadero.com, and for things like that, if you have a list of items that you would particularly really like to use, let me know, and we'll look into that.
So if you go to the SourceForge, you can pull all the samples down into Starter if they are missing from Starter. I think if I remember correctly, there was an option to install the samples. If that didn't get checked, just go to SourceForge and it'll give you the command to download all those samples. Make sure you select the Berlin version, and you can download them. Can you just include SQLite directly for database in Starter? So Theoretically, you probably could, but you would lose a lot of the cool features that FireDAC has. So you could probably come up with some way to talk directly to SQLite or some other database to add database support in Starter Edition. But you're doing things the hard way at that point. It really comes down to, if your time is worth very much at all to you, you'll end up doing a lot more work to do databases that way than just paying the money to get Starter Edition.
So a question here about someone who has some issues with the FireDAC components of MongoDB. Yeah, Mongo is definitely supported in FireDAC. I've written apps using it myself. If you have any problems, well, first of all, we always have support. So you can contact embarcadero.com/support and drop them a mail, and they will help. But also, there's some good communities. So, for example, there's a C++ Builder developers community on Google+, which I'd actually like to encourage everyone who's attending these sessions to join and participate in. It's a good community with a few people there, and would be good to see it more active, actually. So join that and post questions there.
So there's a question about voice to text. There are, in Starter Edition, I'm trying to think, there are some APIs out there you can use that will give you voice to text support. For example, Amazon has their Alexa API, they call it, that does voice to text, voice recognition to text, which I believe you could use. I've actually been wanting to go out and try that API, but I haven't. On Android, though, Android includes an API for doing voice to text. It works really good, and I've done a couple skill sprints on that and have some libraries you can download and use. Well, I haven't tested them recently, although someone else, I think, was telling me that they were using them and they got them working. So there is a Windows voice recognition API that you could probably plug into and use. Actually, on Windows 8 or Windows 10, it's probably pretty good. That's been they've been working on it for a while, and there have been some huge improvements on that lately. So that might be a pretty good option. So you just need to look into that API, and you can probably grab that from Starter and use it. But we don't have any components built in for that. Release of a PDF of C++ Builder's user guide into the wild. So actually, there is a. If you go to DocWiki, and now I'm not able to pull it up here. Where's my video's almost done? Yay! If you go to the DocWiki, docwiki.embarcadero.com, there are a few PDFs. I think most of the PDFs are around mobile tutorials that you can download. I know David I is actually working on a C++ user guide PDF, or at least was at one point. I'm not sure what the status is on that. But you can probably find a way to grab it. It just uses MediaWiki, and there's some tools out there that will convert MediaWiki into PDFs. And then you can use that to create a PDF version of the C++ user guide. Because there's quite a bit of good documentation in there around C++, and there's actually a user's guide in the DocWiki. So the question here about Turbo C or C# Turbo Edition, Turbo Builder. There aren't any plans for that. I know that when Microsoft first announced .NET, that they said that the future was all about .NET, and if it wasn't .NET, it wasn't going to run on Windows, and so there was a huge investment made into supporting .NET, and now we see that Microsoft, still all of Microsoft's products, whether it be their browsers or Windows or Office or whatever, are written in C++, and they're all native code. They're not .NET, and they're actually now Windows 10 kind of favors native code over .NET code. You can use C# to develop native code as well as .NET code now, but they're favoring native code big time now, and kind of .NET's big on the web, but it didn't ever really catch on the desktop. So as far as I know, there are no plans on the roadmap to bring back a Turbo C# builder, but who knows what the future will hold. If .NET and C# catch on again, maybe we'll see some more of that. I guess it's still pretty big on the web, so I guess I won't say C# not catching on.
one thing there might be about the language as well. So if you want a language that's sort of more C#-like in how it's designed, Delphi is very similar to that. Like actually one of the architects of C# was one of the architects of Delphi. It's a very elegant language, very sort of, I don't know, I find it very easy to use. And we hear a lot of people, stories from customers who just sort of get stuff done very, very fast in it, which is a really cool thing. So if you're asking about that, in terms of sort of, what language is good for approaching, that kind of approach, check out Delphi as well. It's fantastic.
If you go to embarcadero.com/products/cbuilder/videos, there is a video here on configuring RAD Studio for Android application development, and this will walk you through the steps of installing the Android SDK for mobile development. There's not really any hidden steps, but probably a couple things that aren't immediately intuitive. When you do install the professional with mobile or enterprise editions of RAD Studio or C++ Builder, it actually will give you the option to install the Android SDK automatically. If there's an option, I'm in Starter Edition now. If you go into the options for the IDE, there is an SDK Manager screen, and from there you can see if it's pointing to all the correct pieces of the Android SDK, and if it's not, you can go out and browse and it'll say, hey, I need the align something.exe, and you can go find that file and point it to it. And occasionally, Google moves those pieces around. Zip-align, that was when they moved around. They said, oh, Zip-align, let's put it in this folder here instead of this folder. And then if you update it, all of a sudden it quit working, and so you had to go find it and point it to the right location again. So that might be what is going on. I'm not quite sure I understand the question completely, but you can point it to the right location here. Are REST libraries also available for the Starter Edition? No, the REST libraries are for Pro. I thought they were in Starter Edition, but yeah, they're only in Pro, it turns out.
Sure. So there are a couple more questions. Jeff says, might have missed it in a previous day. Is C++ Builder using the official Clang front-end LLVM, or is it a fork of Clang that we've modified and added extensions of some sort? So it's the latter. We've added quite a lot of compiler extensions, in fact. In fact, today's session sort of briefly touches on one of those, just because of we happen to use them for the FireMonkey Platform Services, which we'll get to when we actually get to today's session. So we first started using Clang back in the Clang 3.1 days, which is several years ago now. And we were the first people to bring a Clang compiler to Windows with the Win64 Clang compiler. And that was based on Clang 3.1 with a whole bunch of our extensions. So we have extensions for a number of things. They range from sort of language items like properties, for example. So we have __ property that gives you a property on a class that can be backed by a field or a method, where those can be, the field or the method can be private, for example, even when the property is public. That's really nice for encapsulation. Things like RTTI as well. Some stuff is pulled in for Delphi interop. So as you might know, we make Delphi as well, and C++ Builder can consume code that's made in Delphi. The Delphi compiler actually generates C++ header files, and you can link that in. So the two languages actually interoperate rather nicely, which is very cool, especially for pure native code like the way that we provide. The one that we look at today, actually a bit later in today's session, is to do with interfaces. C++ doesn't actually have a concept of an interface. You end up with a sort of an abstract class, lots of pure virtual methods. But we also have the concept of a specific interface construct, which is something that defines the methods. It is identifiable with a unique ID as well, a GUID, and it's COM compatible. So if you happen to use COM on Windows and you're stuck using ATL or something like that, that's a nightmare. It is much better to use sort of inbuilt language primitives that are COM aware. And so things like that. So we add all those kind of things into Clang. So we're also sort of upgrading that. At the moment, we're using Clang 3.3 with a whole bunch of backported fixes from future versions of Clang. And we released the roadmap a few days ago, and our aim is to move up to Clang 3.9. And so keep an eye on that. We're going to be sticking to the latest version of Clang in future, but also with all of our extensions as well. But go back, and there's a replay for Wednesday's session. So there were two things we did on Wednesday. Actually, the first was just sort of an an introduction to C++, and then upgrading some old code to newer, more modern C++. But the second one was a really interesting sort of conversation, really, just between Patrick Scheller of the C++ Google Plus group and Bruneau Babet, who's one of our compiler engineers. And they covered a lot of those sort of topics about the history of the compiler and the extensions that we add and that kind of thing. It's a fascinating talk. So that's up on YouTube right now, so go check it out. So a couple more questions. Are there any plans to open the IDE to other languages or extensions from third parties? So I believe you can already do this, at least to the majority of the extent. You can. We have the Tools API, which is a plugin API for the IDE, and you can actually use that to add what we call personalities, where a personality is for a particular language. I haven't actually done that myself, so I'm not certain how deep that goes, but I know that the personalities we already have, Delphi and C++ Builder, are implemented using that, so it should already be possible. If you're interested in doing this, if you're interested in bringing another language to the IDE, then what I suggest is actually just contact me. Drop me an email, david.millington@embarcadero.com, and we can have a chat over email and look into what's possible. The components for plotting financial graphs. Yes, look, there are several charting components, but one of the best is T-Chart Pro. It's great. It does an awful lot of stuff, including a lot of financial charts. Question as well, is there any well-known trading platform software? Look, I believe there is, but I know there is stuff written using it, but I'm not sure I should comment on what that is or anything like that. But yes,
when I was in South Korea, actually, I was working with, and I can't remember the name of the company, but they were one of the big companies that did trading software for South Korea, and they were using Delphi, and I was helping them with their mobile app. So, yeah, there are companies out there using Delphi, FireMonkey, Delphi C++ Builder for financial trading.
The roadmap includes support for Linux Server. So that means supports console-only user interfaces, not FMX. Yes, at least in the first release. So the upcoming Godzilla release will include Linux Server support. And yes, our goal there is, console applications, yes, but also things like databases and web and Apache modules and that kind of thing. We're really focusing on the server-side support for Linux in the first release. We have heard from a lot of people for a lot of interest in having FireMonkey available on Linux as well. So we haven't officially scheduled that in a roadmap, but we are interested in hearing. If you would find that useful to you, then drop us an email and let us know. Is there a new technique of sharing data between applications? This question is probably referring to app tethering, which was demonstrated in Eli's session yesterday on games. So app tethering is a really neat technique where we have a library for connecting two applications, or the same application running on two different devices, or something like that. Between any two devices. So it could be between your Android tablet and your Windows desktop, or between an iOS iPhone and your Android tablet, or any of we support a lot of platforms, and so any app running on any of our platforms supports app tethering, and you can use that to share data between the two. So that certainly is a new technique. It's just come out in the past few releases, and it's really neat. People can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Eli was showing, for example, using an Android tablet to control the game that was running on Windows. But you can also use it for larger amounts of data. You can use it for transferring anything. As the compiler's status page for C++ language support for various compilers, yes, so cppreference.com has a compiler status page for a whole bunch of different compilers and versions. So you can look at, we have a column there for C++ Builder, and it shows what we currently support. We support quite a lot. So to clarify, most of our compilers at the moment are on C++ 11. I think we have 1 or 2 features from C++ 14. And we're planning to upgrade as soon as possible, actually, to a very new version of Clang to get much, all the current language support. C++ 11 was the big one, the really important to support it. It changed the language a lot, and that's why we find that important. We've been focusing recently on supporting different platforms, so it's really important to us to have really good native platform support. So for Android and iOS support, it's really baked into the product. And I think you saw yesterday, actually, with the games, how easy it was just to build and deploy to an Android tablet, for example, which is one of our really big strengths. So one of the things with that is we've been focusing heavily on that, and so we haven't been focusing quite as much on the C++ language additions after we got to C++ 11, which is the important one. And so the roadmap now is to now step on and to start doing that as well. We find that it comes down to a question of practicality. We have customers that want to achieve something, and that something is often to build and deploy an app and get it out to customers, and that means really good platform support. So that's what we've been concentrating on, to actually help you achieve and do stuff. Question here about deploying with Install Express. How is that done now? That might be Install Shield Express. So you can deploy C++ Builder applications with a wide variety of installer technologies. I personally am quite a fan of Inno Setup, actually. I've used that myself. It's even free. But you can certainly use any installer technology as well. There's Install Shield, there's InstallAware, which is actually built with our products. I believe InstallAware is built with Delphi. So you can certainly do that. One of the neat things about C++ Builder is that you can actually often build an app to a single exe. So if you turn off, there are 2 compiler options. You turn off linking with the dynamic RTL, and you turn off linking with packages. And when you do that, you can build and you get just one single exe file that is your entire application. That actually makes it incredibly easy to deploy. You don't even really need an installer. But if you have a much larger and much more complex application, you probably have a lot of other files. You probably do want to build with packages just to keep everything sort of separate and isolated. And yes, any installer product supports that easily, and they're easy to use with C++ Builder. Question: when components are placed on the UI, the name property can be set. When renaming later on, only events connected to that object are renamed, but not the references in the code. Is the reason it's done like that? That's a good question, and that would be a really nice thing to do. I suggest, actually, if you have suggestions like that for things that would be a neat feature, please drop me an email. But something that's interesting that will be coming up for you is in Update 2 for C++ Builder, which is scheduled sometime soon. We have C++ rename refactoring, where you'll be able to rename any identifier, and it will go through and automatically rename stuff for you. But for all sorts of things, for feature requests like that, or sort of tweaks to make things a bit easier or something like that, always very interested in hearing that kind of thing, so drop us an email. Is there a glossary for newcomers for our commonly used abbreviations like REST, FIDAC, and so on? They're used in our newsletters but not explained. That's a really good suggestion. I think sometimes we end up just sort of using the names because we know what we are and we're so used to them, and it's really easy to forget that we actually need to explain what all this technology is. So my apologies for that, actually. So FIDAC is our database framework. It's an excellent database framework. It supports, I'm not sure how many databases, 20, 30, I have no idea. You can write your own drivers for databases as well, but I think pretty much any database that you could possibly want to use is already supported. And so that's a really, really good framework. That's what FIDAC is. So REST is representation state transfer, and actually I see that was already answered in the chat log. But it's a method for talking to and from web servers, basically, and transferring data around. So it's quite a common sort of way of transferring data, and we have sort of good REST APIs that make it easy to use that kind of online communication between your app and between a server. Is there any way to convert an old Ball and C++ Builder 6 BPR project over to Berlin 10? Well, yes, there is. So C++ Builder 6 is quite old now. I think that was from 2001, 2002 or something like that. But yes, we absolutely do support upgrading. And I think, in fact, you can simply open a BPR file with Berlin and it should upgrade. But one thing that you might find useful is simply just to create a new project in Berlin, and you can just drag and drop all your CPP files straight into the project manager. That's also an easy way to do stuff. But you can just open up the project file inside the Berlin. It will create the new upgraded project file. It will upgrade all the settings and that kind of thing for you. So that should be quite easy. Typically, you tend to recommend over that kind of time distance, and we're talking 15 years or something, just to create a new project and drop the C++ files in. The reason for that is simply because we have so much more that's new, new compiler options, that kind of thing, and so it's quite good to sort of start and use the new items, set up the new settings, that kind of thing. Where do I turn off packages in Berlin to get the single exe? So there are two settings to do that. The first is, so in the project options, in the linker settings, I think, there is a setting to build for dynamic RTL, and you should turn that off. And then further down on the left-hand side of the project options, there's a setting about packages, and then there's a sub-item inside packages. I actually can't remember what it's called. I don't have the ID in front of me right now, but there's only one sort of subsection in there. And in that, there is a setting to link with runtime packages, and you need to uncheck that. So uncheck dynamic RTL and uncheck link with runtime packages. And when you do both of those, you will get a single exe.
A couple of people asked what I used to display the Nexus 5 on the computer. I was using Reflector 2. So it was actually displaying on my Mac. Actually, there's a Reflector for Windows, but I was using the OS 10 version, the Mac OS version of it. In the past, I used VNC Viewer Lite, I think it was. I think that's what it was. And it installed a VNC server on the phone and then could view it from VNC on the computer. And that worked pretty good too. The nice thing about this one is it lets you use the cast functionality on the phone, and your desktop just shows up as a cast target. So you just run the software on your desktop and then go into your Android device, swipe from the top, find where it says cast, tap that, and then you'll see your PC there or your Mac there. You can select that and start sharing the screen right to it. So that's what I like about that. It doesn't require any special software on the phone itself. So there's some questions here about Arc. This is if I inherit from T-Object on Windows and not mobile, do I get Arc? And it points out Arc is only implemented for iOS and Android currently. It's not on Windows. The unique pointers, though, that Dave was showing do work on Windows. Another question here about, it's confusing, if ARC's only implemented in Delphi, how do I know when and what will be managed memory-wise in C++?
Well, this is David I, not David.
Oh, thanks, David.
Anything in FireMonkey with the mobile compilers that inherits from T-Object has Arc. Arc is is stuck inside. If people look at the implementation of T-Object for the mobile platforms, if you have Pro or Enterprise Edition, you get the RTL source code. You can see in T-Object the reference counting and releasing mechanisms. So you can also just, let things go out of scope and have no more reference counts, and then it just goes away. You can use dispose. There's the normal patterns of calling destructors and so on. So you can, if you're used to writing code the sort of old-fashioned way, you can keep using that. And under the covers on the mobile compilers for Delphi and C++, the magic will just happen automatically. And the teams are looking at what might be possible to add an option to implement ARC on non-mobile platforms. We actually, if you think about it, we had to do this on iOS. When we first did Delphi for iOS back in XE4, iOS is all about ARC, and it was Apple that created ARC. We didn't create ARC, this automatic reference counting. They did that in favor of things like garbage collection and so on iOS itself. So Objective-C and Swift, all of those have ARC built in addition to our compilers. We have it built in. So we had to do it for iOS anyway. And so that's where it started with Delphi XE4, and then we've added it in C++. I've put the link to the ARC doc wiki. There's two different pages, one for ARC Delphi and one for ARC C++. I put those links in as well, so you can take a look at it if you're interested. Otherwise, it just magically happens under the covers. So it's irrelevant how it's actually implemented. It could have been implemented, for example, in assembler, or it could have been implemented in C or something else. It just turns out since T-Object is implemented on the VCL side in Delphi and on the FireMonkey side in Delphi, then under the covers it's Delphi, but it's actually just an object. And there was some confusion when David M. talked about ARC not being available for your C++ classes. He was talking about pure C++ classes. If I say, my customer is a class in C++, if it doesn't inherit from T-Object, then even on mobile it will not have ARC built in. But you can inherit from T-Object, and any object that does that, like a T-form or a T-button or a T-list box or even your own classes or objects in C++, they will be ARC enabled when you compile and link with the iOS and Android Delphi and C++ compilers. So I wanted to make sure that that's cleared up. And somebody was asking about, well, if you're building cross-platform applications for things like desktop or server systems and things that don't have ARC in the compilers, what are you supposed to do? And again, don't do anything. Just allocate your objects and free your objects. Call the constructors, call the destructors, and do your memory management cleanup. But again, we will guarantee that all of the objects that are part of FireMonkey visual framework and non-visual that inherit from T-Object, that those will be cleaned up for you. But you can still not care. You can do things the old-fashioned way. Create your objects, free your objects. Go ahead, David M.
Yes, sorry about that. My laptop froze and I had to reboot just at an inopportune moment as questions about ARC came in. But from what I heard there, the end of your answer, that was a great answer, so thank you. It's really something that doesn't affect your normal C++ code. If you just write a normal sort of pure C++ only class, it will just behave as it always did, and you should manage the lifetime using smart pointers and that kind of thing. If you want to take advantage of it for your C++ classes, then you can do so by inheriting from T-Object, as in the code snippet. So really it's more of a curiosity, it's just something to be aware of and something interesting.
So the question here about targeting the universal Windows platform for x86, x64, and ARM on Windows. So we don't have any plans to target ARM on Windows right now at this point, but actually Berlin has some features for the WinRT, which technically makes it a UWP app. UWP means multiple things, multiple levels, if you will, although the levels aren't officially defined. So technically, with Berlin, you can make UWP apps because you can access the WinRT API now, or Windows RT API. In a future release, if you check out our roadmap, we are planning to release support for what was previously known as the Centennial Bridge, to allow you to take a C++ builder or Delphi app and package it up in an AppX so that it can get an app ID and be delivered through the Windows App Store. So at that point, it will be a native app. It will be native code, Win32 or Win64 code, that will be running on the device. It will have all of the access to all the features of UWP as any other UWP app would, and will be deployed through the App Store and updated to the App Store. It will run on Windows x86 and x64. It will not run on Windows ARM, so because it's a native app. And so hopefully I answered your question. So that is planned to come later this year. I know Marco Cantu has done some work with that, some proof of concepts, and we can expect to see that soon. I think we're going to try to do a webinar on it in the near future, so stay tuned on community for that.
So there's a question here where in my demo I said you can jump to a controls method, and the question is how do we jump to that method, please? What I was showing was the event handlers for a control. In this case, it was a button on the form and the on-click event. So the event handlers are shown in the object inspector, which by default I think is on the bottom left-hand side of the IDE. And so you can look at any one of those. There are things like on-click or something like that. Double-click the entry, and it will actually create a method for you if one doesn't exist, and navigate to it. And controls actually have a sort of default, so clicking a button is the most likely action. So when you just double-click a button on the form, it will do the same thing for the on-click event. So that's all I did there. I just dropped the button on the form and double-clicked it, and it created the on-click event for me, and then I went to that code.
So there's a couple questions about the download source code for those games. The C++ code is up on GitHub. If you go to community.marketerra.com, there is a blog post that you can go to that will link to the GitHub page where you can download those. There's 3 different versions of the games. There's Classic, which is pre-C++ 11, Modern, which is C++ 11, and then Starter, which removes the database and app tethering functionality so that it works with the Starter edition. I've tested the Starter version with Starter, and it works fine. A couple of people have posted that they tested it as well. Now, there is a Delphi version of these games as well, but this is C++ Boot Camp, so we didn't post it this week. But next week, if you stay tuned to community.marketerra.com, we will post a link to the Delphi ones as well. So definitely stay tuned for that. And hopefully we'll have a webinar in the future that will highlight the Delphi ones too. Are VCL and FireMonkey built upon something common like the RTL? Yes, they are. Well, yeah, so they both make use of the RTL. I'm trying to think, at the hierarchy, so it's at one point everything inherits from T-object. But I'm trying to remember where the FireMonkey and VCL diverge, where they branch off. So one branch becomes VCL, one branch becomes FireMonkey. I think it's pretty high. I can't remember if FireMonkey derives directly from T-object or if there's a couple other intermediate layers in there. There may be some intermediate levels in there. But what you can do to find out is if you just go to a FireMonkey control. Oh, you have to have source, though, for that. So if you have Pro or Enterprise, you can look at that, although you could look in the doc wiki as well. Just look at what find a FireMonkey control, look at what it inherits from the doc wiki, and just dig your way up until you find one that's in common with VCL. But internally they do make use of the RTL as well on both sides.
So Jim, I'll put there is a chart in the doc wiki. There is T-object at the base, and then there's T-persistent. There is a T-FMX object along the way.
Okay, so that's where it's at. It's T object to TFMX object.
Yeah, there's T object goes, and then there's T persistent, T component, then TFMX object, and from TFMX object, there's a whole bunch of different things. But I mean, ultimately, a form is a form, a button is a button. There's a few differences in some of the properties, but I'll put that in the chat window. So there is a TFMX object as well. So
okay, great. So there's a question here about app analytics. App analytics is a new feature, and I think it's only available in Pro and Higher. Well, I'm pretty sure it's available in Pro and Higher. It might be in Starter. What it does is allows you to drop a couple components in your form and install analytics into your application. So what the analytics do is it lets you track things like what buttons users click on, how long users use your app, so on and so forth, anonymous usage statistics. So almost everything you use anymore has a checkbox someplace that is asking for your permission to collect anonymous usage statistics. That's what App Analytics does. Now you can also use App Analytics to collect crash information, so you can see what versions are generating what crashes. So you could combine this with something like MAT_except and use MAT_except to grab a stack trace on the crash and then stuff that stack trace into App Analytics. So the App Analytics doesn't give you a full stack trace, but it does give you some basic information about crashes and stuff. So it's in some ways similar to something like MAT_except. In some ways it's different to something like MAT_except. It does more than MAT_except does, except it doesn't do the stack traces and such that MAT_except does. So you could find a way to combine those, I'm sure. If you are having trouble though, and you're getting some errors about not having the Android SDK set up correctly, if you go into the SDK manager in the IDE options, you'll see it lists, says, hey, this is the Android SDK, this is the Java, this is the Android NDK, and if there's a little warning error triangle next to any of those, it can't find the right files. So you just got to point to the right place. Occasionally those move around when Google updates, and you can usually find them. I've usually been able to correct that pretty quick. You just go and see the triangle, and that's when you get correct. Just point to the right place, and I usually do a search for the file, find the right file, and then point to that, and it's good to go. Feel free to email any of us if you do have questions. You can catch us on Skype or wherever as well, and we're happy to help you out. And thank you so much for being part of this C++ Builder Bootcamp. We've had a great turnout, lots of good questions, and that's fantastic. So great to see everybody, and appreciate all the feedback we've gotten. It sounds like there's some interest in maybe doing a Delphi version of this, and maybe a lower level learn to program even type bootcamp as well. So we'll see what we can do. We love doing these sort of things and love getting a chance to engage with you and talk with you about all the cool things you can do with software development. So stay tuned at community.marketingera.com, and we have your email address now too as well when you register for this, so we can email you as well when we have something going on. So with that, I think we're going to go ahead and sign off. Appreciate everybody here that's saying thank you for this boot camp and that you got so much out of it. Yes, we can get David Millington's blog on the menu bar at community.marketingera.com. There's an email I saw about that, so that should be done hopefully over this weekend. And yeah, fantastic. Great stuff. Okay, I think we're good to go. Thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned to blogs.marketingera.com. We'll have the replays will be up shortly, and all the sample code and source code will be available for download, so you can download it and take a look at this and work on this on your own. All right. Thank you so much, and we will talk to you later. Thanks for joining us. Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.